When it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, Lindsey Graham is so excited talking about this operation on the Kursk region. He says that it's brilliant, it's unbelievable. And Zelensky is talking about this is Putin's end. And in your opinion, what's important about this operation and why they're talking a lot about this operation and what's the benefit coming out of this operation for Ukraine or even for people like Lindsey Graham?
Well, first of all, it appears that Ukraine has been preparing for this together with their NATO masters for a long time. This operation was months, if not years, in the planning. This operation uses the Russians, are capturing equipment and evaluating equipment. They're looking at things. This is a NATO army. And what I mean by that is they're using NATO weapons, but more importantly, they're using NATO tactics. And I'm not talking about just, small unit tactics, etc. We're talking about the next phase of warfare, where each piece of military equipment, each soldier is linked collectively into some sort of singularity of information resources that can be communicated to a remote command post that has total situational awareness and is able to direct things. They have intelligence beamed in on this, and real time, they're able to predict Russian movements and anticipate Russian movements. They're deploying new generations of drones, including some high-speed drones that are being used to shoot down Russian helicopters. These are the best troops in Ukraine, the best equipped, the best trained. They've been trained by NATO, by the British, by the Americans, and they're in it to win. I mean, this is the thing people have to understand is that this isn't a limited incursion. This is an effort to defeat Russia on the battlefield, to capture a significant part of Russia, to disrupt significant parts of the Russian economy. I mean, two of the objectives are this oil transfer station and the Kursk nuclear power plant. These are objectives to be disrupted, damaged, destroyed by the Ukrainian invader, but they're supposed to hold on to this territory, not give it back. This is a Western army that went in. This is a NATO army that went in, fighting the next generation war that NATO, all NATO troops are being trained upon. The irony is that apparently only the Ukrainians know how to do it now. This is a totally different approach than it was taken in the summer of 2023 when the Ukrainians launched their big counteroffensive that failed dramatically against Russian defenses. The Ukrainians and NATO recognized by late summer, early fall of 2023 that they can't do that again. And they've been husbanding resources, resources that should have gone to the front lines to fill the gaps. But Ukraine has sacrificed so many troops in the Donbass fighting a futile fight, buying time so that this new NATO army could be built. And look, they've got the M1 tanks. They've got the Leopards. They've got the Bradleys. They've got the Strykers. They've got the Martyrs. They've got the Caesar artillery, M777. They got the HIMARS. It's all there, all integrated using Starlink and other communications capabilities that are managed by Americans and NATO people. They have embedded the Ukrainian force with facilitators, whether you want to call them mercenaries or sheep dipped, doesn't matter. They're not Ukrainian. And many of the combat forces are literally Polish army forces that have been redesignated as Ukrainian forces. There's some French combat units. We're talking about, company-sized units of Frenchmen that fight as a unit under the flag of Ukraine, but wearing the French arm patch. There's lots of Americans there. So this is it. This is the strategic reserve of Ukraine. And the idea that they would throw it away in a futile effort is absurd. The Ukrainians believe they can win. Ukrainians believe they are winning. Now, I've spoken to Russians and I listened to Abdi Aladanov, and the Russians, of course, are of a different opinion. And I think the majority of the West shares the Russian opinion, meaning, wow, Ukraine, good job. Nice little temporary victory. But what happens when Russia starts to grind you down? But the goal here was to inflict political damage on Russia, to embarrass Vladimir Putin to an extent that succeeded. But you have to understand that Putin is untouchable in this regard. He just won an election. He has 80% support of the population. So the idea you're doing political damage to Putin is absurd. You're actually just strengthening him, because the Russian people are programmed to rally around their leader, and now all of Russia is rallying around this cause. One of the goals was to divert Russian military resources away from the Donbass, from Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia fronts. Nope, those forces have remained intact, and they continue to advance. People have forgotten that Russia's taking 5, 6, 10 kilometers worth of territory a day, and this inexorable advance across the Ukrainian plains of Donbass. And then the other one was to do not just political harm to Putin, but to break the will of the Russian people, and they failed on that. Can the Ukrainians dig in and hold off the Russian attacks and then say, aha, we got a piece of territory in Kursk that we'll trade you for Kherson? The West loves this idea, but it's stupid, because Kherson is Russia. It's been accepted into Russia constitutionally as part of Russia, and Russia is not in the business of giving Russia away. So, it's one of those non-starters. You just have to scratch your head and say, why did you even think that was a possibility? But that's where they're at. And the last thing is to create they're trying to convince the West that the investments that the West has made has been worth it. Now, Ukraine is losing everything. So for this gambit to work, the West will now have to double down on providing new Abrams, new Leopards, new Bradleys, new Martyrs, because they're being burned through right now in significant numbers. Ukraine needs more Western aid. That Western aid was slowing down. Ukraine's hopeful by carrying out, what it is claiming is a successful military attack against Russia and Kursk, that the West will step up to the plate. I don't think the West is buying into it, to be honest. And I don't think the Ukrainian army is buying into it anymore either. They're in a very difficult situation. And it's one that, good, effective military leadership is going to have to evaluate and determine what the next course of action is. But generally speaking, in order to survive, they're going to have to retreat. And I think that's what's next in store for Ukraine, is a big, massive retreat from Kursk.
The problem is, it seems that in the eyes of NATO, they're thinking that Russia wants to capture all of Ukraine. That's why Russia is losing. But in the eyes of Russians, that's not the case. And everybody around the world understands that Russia is not interested in the western part of Ukraine. They have already achieved what they wanted to achieve. But in terms of politically demilitarizing and denazifying, they don't need to go to the western part of Ukraine to demilitarize.
That was pre-Kursk. Let's just clear the record here. NATO invaded Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. Let me just say it one more time so you understand the gravity of what I'm saying. NATO invaded Russia, the heartland of Russia, Kursk. NATO invaded. Has it sunk in yet what I just said? That's a game-changing event, Nima. Forget anything you thought about this before. It's over. It's done. Ukraine is dead. That's the only outcome now. Ukraine is dead. Now the question is, does the West want to die alongside it? I spoke to a Russian official today, and he wouldn't get specific, but he basically said, this decision's already been made, and you'll know what I'm talking about when it happens, and it won't take too long for it to happen. See, Ukraine and the West have been laboring under this perception that Russia's at war. I don't know how many times Putin and the Russians had to say, guys, we're not even close to being at war. This is a special military operation. We're sort of like tying one leg back and one hand back and sort of hopping around. NATO invaded Russia. And so, we'll have to, I don't know who's calling me, but they'll have to wait. NATO invaded Russia. So this is going to bring about a terrible Russian response. It's the end of Zelensky's regime. It will not be allowed to exist. It's the end of Ukraine. Dmitry Medvedev hinted at what the consequences will be. Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Nikolaev, Kharkov, and now Sumy. See, Sumy wasn't on that map anymore, but now it is. This incursion into Kursk cost Ukraine Sumy. Russia's not going to give it back. It may have cost them Kiev. It may have cost them. And you say Russia doesn't want Western Ukraine. That doesn't mean Russia can't destroy Western Ukraine. And if you think there's going to be a city of Lvov left over when this is done, think again. Lvov is the heart of Banderist ideology, and Russia has now said it's over, finished, do svidaniya. That's just my perception. But I have to tell you that this official who is connected, he's in government, made it clear that Ukraine is going to learn what war is in the very near future. And he said it will send a shiver down the spine of everybody in the West. So congratulations, NATO, you idiots. You invaded Russia, and you didn't think there was going to be a price to be paid. And the other thing that the individual said is bases operating on NATO soil that are being used to support this are no longer off limits. So I think Russia's going to hit Ukraine and show the world what war is. And as he said, you guys think we haven't been developing weapons, that we don't have weapons. We are going to basically unleash some new weapons that will show the West that what will happen to you if you want to go to war with Russia. If you want war with Russia, what will happen to you? Because it's about to happen to Ukraine. And then I think Russia is going to say, you have F-16s operating on Romanian soil? No, you don't. They no longer exist. Neither does the air base where they were at. You don't get to support your war against Russia in Ukraine using bases in Poland and Romania because you invaded Kursk. You invaded Russia. NATO invaded Russia. I just want everybody to understand what happened, what is happening, and why it's going to be a game-changing event, at least according to this Russian politician. Now, could he be blowing smoke? He didn't seem to be the kind of guy that blew smoke, but we'll find out.
The other thing, Scott, in Germany, they're bragging that German tanks on the Russian soil. It's unbelievable when you look at Germany and the way they're hurting themselves because of the conflict in Ukraine, and they're not gaining anything but losing. How we can understand their behavior in Ukraine?
Yeah, people got mad at me when I said it before, but I'll say it again. Scratch a German, you get a Nazi. If you're a German and you're proud of the fact that German tanks are operating on Russian soil, not just in Ukraine, but on Russian soil, in Kursk, means you're an idiot and you're a Nazi at heart. Means you have the same DNA as your Nazi forefathers and you believe in the same things. I think Dmitry Medvedev said it best, that if you're proud about having a new generation of German tanks on Russian soil, then we'll be more than happy to upgrade the Russian tanks that are mounted on the plinths outside of the German parliament in Berlin. Right now they have two T-34-85s, which were part of the Russian force that captured Berlin from the Nazis. What game does Germany want to play? Russia's fed up. I don't understand. At least General Cavoli understands that. He said, when this ends, he said, we will be facing the largest military in the world, the most powerful military in the world, governed by a very angry government. NATO invaded Russia. NATO invaded Russia. There's no equivalency. You see, people are like, well, Russia invaded Ukraine, therefore Ukraine can make. No. Ukraine had an illegal Western coup that removed the constitutionally elected government, replaced it with ultranationalists who then declared war against ethnic Russians, Russian culture, Russian language in the Donbass, slaughtering the Russians, and eventually compelling the leader of the Russian people to intervene to save the Russians. There's no equivalency here. These are bad people. These are Banderas. These are Nazis. Well, the Germans know this because they're Nazis too. Scratch a German, get a Nazi. Germany, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Hold accountable those politicians, those military people who are gloating that there's German tanks killing Russians on Russian soil today. If you don't condemn this with every ounce of your being, then you're human scum. You're Nazis. Prove me wrong.
It's so amazing, Scott, when you look at the behavior of the Biden administration, considering all these difficulties that we are having in Ukraine, in Africa, in the Middle East. And they could have they could have some sort of relationship to work with each other in order to bring these tensions down, or for the benefit of all the parties involved. But they have decided to double down on Ukraine, which doesn't make any sort of sense for me, for anybody. And why Ukraine is so important, why it's all done. You cannot do anything. But maybe you have to consider any sort of other type of solutions for the conflict in order to have, because the day after this conflict is over, it's much more important than what's going on right now, in my opinion, because the war, as you mentioned, is already done.
I think the problem is a lack of imagination on the part of the Biden administration and those who are in the American establishment advising the Biden administration on Russian policy. And understand, these are the same people that will advise a Trump administration. We have lost the generation that produced Jack Matlock, the last great American ambassador to the Soviet Union. Everybody that's come after him has been horrible, especially those in the 90s and in the 2000s who were sent to not help Russia, but to destroy Russia. The Strobe Talbots, the Michael McFalls. These are the worst people in the world because they're not experts on Russia. They're experts on destroying Russia. They're experts on manipulating Russia. They're experts on trying to transform Russia into something that Russia isn't. And they are all steadfastly against Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader who came after Boris Yeltsin, who said, nah, Russia isn't defined by the 90s. Russia is defined by Russia. It'll be Russians that define Russia. My daughter just graduated from Georgetown University, the School of Foreign Service, or the Foreign Service Institute. And she got her master's degree, and her classmates were all people who are going into the State Department or going into, working with, the various National Endowment for Democracy think tanks and things of that nature. They are indoctrinated, not educated. The whole process of higher education in America today that used to produce some of the best foreign area officers in the world, the Soviet FAOs, foreign area officers that were produced by the United States back in the 1970s and the 1980s, were the best in the world, genuine experts about the Soviet Union, about Russia, culture, linguistically. They understood it. They could give good advice. And the United States State Department was staffed with genuine Russian experts, not pro-Russian people, pro-American, but people who understood Russia, therefore were able to come up with sound policy about Russia. They were all purged after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They were told that their skill set was no longer welcome. I remember I applied to the CIA in the early 1990s to be a Russian analyst. And I was encouraged to do so by the CIA, by old school people who knew me back in the days when I was a weapons inspector in the former Soviet Union. And I remember being interviewed by the head of the new Office for Russian and East European Affairs, OREO, I think they called it. And I had a long talk with them. I mean, my resume is clear, 2 classified commendations from the director of the CIA for my work in Russia. I thought it would have been a shoo-in. And in the end, he said, no, we can't take you because you're old thinking. We don't want old thinking. We don't want that Soviet taint. We need new thinkers. And so the CIA purged all of their real experts, and they brought in people. And at the same time, they changed their whole analytical or organizational methodology. When I was doing stuff with the CIA, I was never a CIA employee. I want to make that clear. But I used to have the special badge. I could go around the CIA, and I used to talk with CIA people about various issues pertaining to Russia. If I had an issue pertaining to photo interpretation, wanted to know something about X on the ground, the guy that I would talk to had been sitting in that chair for decades, looking at the same piece of ground for decades. He was a damn expert upon that. He could tell you if it was a red ant or a black ant that made that anthill. He was that good. I'm exaggerating, but the CIA decided that that wasn't cost effective, that they needed to basically diversify their workforce. And so instead of allowing people to sit in the same desk, do the same job and get promoted in place, instead they started to take people and move them from job to job. So you do a 6-month tour here, you do a 6-month tour there. And instead of being a master of your trade, you became a jack of all, which means you didn't know how to do anything. And I saw it when I was a weapons inspector in Iraq. I had to deal with this new generation of CIA analysts, and it's an embarrassment. When they come in and brief us on their interpretation of U-2 imagery over Iraq, they didn't know what the hell they were looking at. It became really apparent when myself and others who had just gotten back from Iraq inspecting the very site that the CIA is now briefing us on, when they didn't know anything. They're just making it up. Suspicious crane. Why is it suspicious? I asked. Well, it's there. Yeah, but do you know why it's there? No, that's why it's suspicious. Did you read my inspection report? No, we don't have access to that inspection report. Well, you know, that crane's there to repair the hole in the roof. Did you look at the suspicious hole in the roof? Well, yes. Well, we believe that that's a modification being made to the roof to bring in potential computer numerical controlled machine tools so that Iraq can expand its ballistic missile production capability. I said, no, the hole in the roof's there because it flooded there. Did you read the weather report? You see the flood. You see the rivulet down there where the waters come in and undermined the wall, and the wall came down, and then the beam came down because the support came down. So you got a hole in the roof. Now, the Iraqis have shored it up, but they haven't repaired that roof yet. So it's about flooding. It's not about ballistic missile production. You just made all that stuff up because you're an idiot. And that's the CIA today, staffed by idiots, people who don't know anything about anything. They aren't allowed to get smart on Russia because we don't want experts on Russia. Because if we had real experts on Russia, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today. The most dangerous person in the world is somebody who actually goes to Russia, learns about Russia, and tries to bring that knowledge back. Me, why do you think they raided my house? All right. I know more about Russia than any CIA analyst out there. And I challenge them right now to a debate. I have more relevant information than them. I'll tell you one reason why. Back in February of 2023, and again February of this year, I attended what's called Defender of the Fatherland's Day celebration at the Russian embassy, sort of a celebration of the Russian military. I got to meet the defense attaché and his staff, all of his colonels, and we would talk. That's sort of what defense attachés do for a living, you know, they talk. And back in the day, if I were on active duty, talking to these guys, I would have gone back and I would have written reports about what we talked about, because that's the game that's being played. They're picking your brain, you're picking their brains, and you go back and you say, hey, well, you know, this person said this or this person said that, and we think it means this, and you write that report. Not a single American was in it from the defense establishment was present at this. These guys aren't talking to Americans. Americans aren't allowed to talk to them. I know more about the Russian military than any American analyst because I get to talk to them. I'm not bragging or anything, but Abdi Aladanov, the man who's leading the one of the leaders of the Russian response to Kursk, I've met. I count him as a friend. I've had many conversations with him. Can anybody else in the U.S. military, in the U.S. intelligence community say that? Have they sat down with Ramzan Kadyrov and talked to him? Have they talked to Adam Delikanov? Have they talked to Lord? They don't know anything about Chechnya or the role that Chechnya plays. I'm not saying that you have to sit there and support Chechnya and support all this. I'm sympathetic to them, but I'm not here to support anybody. I'm here to learn the reality I know more about Chechnya than any CIA analyst because I spent more time in Chechnya than any CIA analyst. I know more about Russia and the interior of Russia. I know more about Novosibirsk industrial capacity or Kursk or Ekaterinburg. Why? I've been there. I've talked to the people. Not as a spy, just as an American citizen. But I'm the most dangerous person to the United States government because I know the reality of Russia, and they don't want this reality transmitted to the American people. That's a threat. The CIA is weak. The State Department has no Russian experts, none. They have experts in manipulating Russia, but they don't have any Russian experts, people that can sit down and say, yes, let's converse. Jack Matlock was a Russian expert. Michael McFaul was not a Russian expert. That's the difference.
The other thing, Scott, would be the Shoigu is talking about sending military equipment to Serbia. And how do you find, you had large protests in Serbia against some companies. And right now they're talking, how do you see the relationship between Russia and Serbia, and where is that going? How do you find the way that it's going right now?
Serbia and Russia have, historically have very close relations. They're brother Slavs. There are some difficulties with the current Serbian government, which has often yielded under pressure from the European Union and NATO to do things that can be interpreted as anti-Russian. But Russia understands this. If you listen to the statements made by the Russian Foreign Ministry, they say, we understand the pressures that Serbia is under. We understand the realities. Russia thinks strategically. And so they're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction that damages relations. They're just going to ride out the storm because Russia is confident that eventually the West will do something that brings Serbia inexorably into the Russian corner. And that's what's happening right now. The West is seeking to try and put a color revolution together in Serbia to overthrow the Serbian government. And Russia won't let that happen. And so that's what's going on. Russia's with Serbia and will stand with Serbia and will not allow Serbia to be brought into the Western orbit.
Is that the case in Georgia as well? Do we have any sort of information coming out of Georgia right now, or the case is gone? It's not working.
The United States lost Georgia. We had Georgia. We owned Georgia. Georgians were with us. My daughter was a Peace Corps volunteer in Georgia, spent 2.5 years there. You really have to screw up to lose Georgia. Georgia was so firmly inside the American camp, so firmly inside the European Union camp, that they passed a constitutional amendment that said that we have to become part of the European Union. That's done now, finished. I mean, the amendment's still there, but it's just not going to happen. Why? Because, again, we don't have Russian experts. We have people who are experts in manipulating and exploiting Russia. And what the Georgian people learned is that whatever Georgian experts we had aren't friends of Georgia. See, the United States is incapable of being a friend of anybody. We're only friends of ourselves. We use everybody. If we had just simply put on our thinking caps, asked ourselves what are the highest priorities for the Georgians and how can we meet those priorities, the Georgians would have bent over backwards for us. You don't have to have Georgia in NATO for Georgia to be in NATO. Anybody who understands Georgia knows what I'm talking about. We already had a Georgian military that was training with NATO, equipped with NATO, everything but NATO. You don't have to have Article 5 protections for Georgia. First of all, it's unrealistic as long as Abkhazia and South Ossetia continue to be, disputed territories. Imagine if the United States actually articulated a plan, a realistic plan for getting Abkhazia and South Ossetia back. Imagine if we told the Georgians that in order to do that, you're going to have to improve relations with the Russians. You're going to have to. Now, that doesn't mean that you walk away from the United States. Imagine if we're the country that's facilitating this improvement of relations so that Russia feels comfortable with Georgia being reunited and also being in the Western orbit. See, if we cared about the Georgians, we wouldn't have to stick a thumb in the Russian eyes. We would teach the Georgians to peacefully coexist with the Russians. We would be like the Russians, thinking strategically long term. You see, once Georgia is reunified and then Georgia now is inclined to say, hey, we can peacefully coexist with Russia and have good economic relations. They need good economic relations, but we can be part of the West too. They can join the European Union. See, the European Union never really wanted them. That's the thing. NATO never wanted them. The European Union never wanted them. It was never going to happen. We were simply using Georgia as a tool to take down Russia. And the Georgians woke up to that reality. Fortunately for Georgia, the Georgian Dream government woke up to that reality in time to check it and save Georgia. Otherwise, Georgia would have gone the route of Ukraine to be a destroyed nation. And it's a very small nation. It can't absorb the damage that Ukraine has. The Russian-Georgian war would be over very quickly, and it would have been devastating for Georgia. So America lost Georgia because, again, go back to what I told you before. We don't have Georgian experts. We don't have Russian experts, and we don't have people that look out for the best interests of nations that we ostensibly call our friends. Russia, on the other end, does have Georgian experts. Russia does have a deep desire to be friends with Georgia. They've been friends with Georgia forever. The Soviet Union incorporated Georgia. My wife is Georgian. She was educated in Moscow. She viewed herself as a Soviet, which means that she recognizes, not just that she's Georgian, but that her friends, her relatives, her comrades, her colleagues are Russians, they're Ukrainians, they're Belarusians, they're Uzbek, they're Tatars. They're part of this great, conglomerate of peoples that, even though it's not the Soviet Union today, still should have a fraternal sense of belonging. The United States doesn't recognize that. We want to undo decades of history and social conditioning of economic reality simply to stick it to the Russians without any concern what the consequences to the Georgian people would be.
Yeah. Just to wrap up this session, Scott, the other decision that the Biden administration has made was sending weapons to Saudi Arabia right now. They're talking about the Biden administration has decided to send weapons, to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. Why they have decided to change their policy?
Because they're losing Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's gone. Chinese came in, brokered a reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, breaking the Sunni wall that was supposed to be confronting the Shia crescent. Saudi Arabia, is BRICS. Iran's BRICS. If you're members of BRICS, you're talking about economic cooperation designed to be to the economic and social and political benefit of both nations. The United States, again, Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about this. The military-industrial complex has taken over America. We only know one thing, and that's war. That's all we know. It's the only thing we can do. If we want to improve relations with nations, we promote war so we can sell them weapons. Look what we're doing in Georgia. We'll help your military, but you need to go to war. If you don't have one, we'll find one for you. You want to come and fight in Iraq for us, even though Georgia has nothing to do with Iraq? Come on, we'll help train you. Want to go to Afghanistan? You have even less to do in Afghanistan, but come on. Oh, wait, we need you to go to Ukraine and go to war and set up a second front. That's all we know. There's no constructive diplomacy out there, none. We have ceded diplomacy to the military. And so right now, in a very complicated and difficult situation, our only solution is to sell Saudi Arabia weapons, as if that's going to buy them. I think we've lost Saudi Arabia. We haven't recognized it yet. I don't think this sale of weapons is going to change anything.